They say when you save someone's life, you're forever connected to them. Like there's an invisible thread between the two of you, stronger than blood or memory. But what if the person you saved didn't want to be saved? What if they wished you just let it burn? That thought used to haunt me. Now it fuels me. It was late March in Charleston, early spring, but the air had the dryness of summer. I remember the light that afternoon. Pale, golden, the kind that made shadows look sharper than they were, the kind of light that makes you nostalgic while you're still in the moment. I had just pulled into the driveway after picking up groceries. My back was aching from a long day, but nothing unusual. As I stepped out, I noticed a faint haze over the kitchen windows. A moment later, the alarm in my gut screamed before my ears caught up. Smoke. "Imogen?" I called, rushing up the porch. No answer. I pushed the door open. Heat slapped me hard. Thick, dark smoke poured from the hallway near the kitchen. My mind went blank, then kicked in like muscle memory. I didn't think about risk. I didn't think about consequences. I just remembered that she was inside. I dropped the bags. My feet were already moving. I wrapped a towel from the rack around my nose and dove in. The walls blurred. The air scratched at my throat. I found her slumped in the hallway, coughing, disoriented. "Sigrid," she croaked. I hauled her up with everything I had left. My legs screamed. My spine flared. We stumbled out the door just as the kitchen window burst behind us. The noise, like glass and thunder, still echoes in my ears. And that was the last time I stood on my own. They said it was a miracle I survived, that the spinal damage could have been worse, that with rehab, I might regain some mobility. But I knew, even then, as I lay on the stretcher staring up at the smoke-stained sky, my life was split cleanly in two, before the fire and after it. In the hospital, time moved like honey in a cold jar. I floated in and out of morphine fogs. My ribs were bound tight, my lower half unresponsive. I was told I had incomplete paraplegia, whatever that meant. All I could focus on was the quiet. The room was filled with flowers, carnations, lilies, arrangements clearly ordered in bulk, but none from Imogen. My brother showed up 2 days in. He looked tired, agitated, barely made eye contact. "You're lucky, you know," he said, half-heartedly adjusting my blanket. "Imogen's been a wreck. She's traumatized. She keeps replaying it all in her head." I opened my mouth to speak, but found nothing worth saying. Trauma? Hers? The nurses were kind, but different, overly polite. One of them whispered something to another when they thought I couldn't hear. Their eyes flitted away when I looked up, as if I was already someone to be managed, not engaged. I thought maybe it was just in my head, until Imogen walked in. She looked perfect, hair smooth, makeup subtle, that silk scarf around the neck kind of elegance she wore like armor. She sat beside me, crossed her legs, and smiled like we were catching up after a long weekend. "You're paralyzed now, Sigrid," she said gently. "Don't burden the family." Her tone was surgical, calm, no venom, no warmth. I blinked. "Excuse me?" She leaned in slightly. "You'll need care. The insurance situation is already a lot. And the kids? This is hard on them too. It's not personal. We all have to adjust." I stared at her for a full beat, then another. "I'm sorry I saved you," I heard myself say. She didn't flinch, just reached out, patted my hand twice, stood up, and walked out. No hug, no thanks, just a quick exit, like she'd dropped off mail. That night, Kaylee came by, my niece. Why, 7 years old, big eyes, red hair tied back like her mother's. She held a crayon drawing, our house, me in a wheelchair with wheels too big and arms too small. She climbed into the chair beside me and whispered, "Are you still part of the family?" I smiled so I wouldn't scream. "Of course I am, baby." She looked unsure. "Mom said you need a place to stay, not a place to live." I hugged her tighter than I probably should have. She giggled and pulled back, not sensing the punch in her words. That was the thing. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was in the softness, in the quiet way people rewrote your role when they thought you couldn't stand anymore, literally or otherwise. I stayed up after visiting hours, the sterile lights buzzing above. I thought about the insurance. Years ago, I'd insisted we upgrade the house coverage. Imogen had rolled her eyes. "You're just too cautious," she said. Now I couldn't help but wonder, who was cautious now? I turned my face toward the hallway. No footsteps. No one coming. A nurse brought in my dinner tray. Didn't speak, just placed it on the rolling table and left. Mashed potatoes, cold, congealed, like an afterthought. I sat in silence, staring at it. My hands didn't reach, not out of pain, but pride. They say families stick together. That blood is thicker than water. But sometimes, blood is just the thing left behind when people walk away from you. That night, I asked to see the home insurance file. What I found was the first missing piece. A week had passed since I'd left the hospital, and my body still felt foreign. I was learning to maneuver the wheelchair, slow turns through tight hallways, inching over thresholds that had once been nothing more than worn wood to my feet. But the hardest terrain wasn't physical. It was the emotional landmines waiting for me in my own home. "Just a little dinner tonight," my brother had said. "No pressure, just some family time." I dressed carefully, a simple navy blouse, hair pulled back into something neat. I even put on lipstick, because dignity, I'd learned, sometimes started with color. When I wheeled myself into the dining room, the first thing I noticed was the table. 8 chairs. None of them for me. No space left at the end. No plate. Not even a napkin. No one said a word. I positioned myself in the corner, next to the old sideboard, near enough to hear, but not close enough to be counted. They kept talking about Imogen's yoga schedule, the school's new pickup policy for Kaylee. My brother passed a bottle of wine to my mother. No one looked my way. I waited. After a long silence, my brother cleared his throat and said, "We've been discussing a few things. Just logistics, really." Imogen nodded, too quickly. "With everything going on, it makes sense to consider the guest house again." My mother added, "We just want to make sure you have the kind of care that fits your new needs." That word again, needs. Used like a curse they were too polite to say aloud. They talked about space, privacy, even air quality. Someone floated the idea of a care center closer to nature. Imogen used the phrase streamlining responsibilities, like she was talking about downsizing a tech startup. I sat there, invisible, like a client on mute in a boardroom Zoom call. Then I spoke. "So, am I being moved out?" The conversation stalled like an engine in mid-turn. My brother rubbed the back of his neck. "We just want what's best for everyone." Imogen, ever the PR queen, offered a smile. "We'll all breathe easier when you have the right help." Kaylee wandered in from the hallway, holding her iPad. She looked at me and said, "Mommy said you're going to live in the little house so we can have our living room back." That was the real meeting. Not the words they used, but the words they didn't say. The silence was the verdict. Later, in my room, I locked the door and pulled out an old notebook. I wrote down everything, word for word, tone for tone, like a court transcript. I underlined one phrase. The moment they speak in passive voice, you're already being pushed out. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Imogen knocked lightly on my door. "Just a quick ask," she chirped. "We've got people coming over this weekend. Would you mind staying in your room while they're here?" She said it like she was asking me to skip a TV show. "It's just easier that way," she added. "Privacy, you know." I looked at her carefully. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm getting better at disappearing." She smiled, like she'd won. But something inside me had shifted. You don't scream when someone cuts you. You learn where to press until the bleeding stops. That night, while the house went still, I pulled out my laptop and logged into the insurance portal, the same one I'd set up years ago when I was still the one paying premiums. My name was gone. The primary contact had been switched. The mailing address had changed. They hadn't just decided to move me out. They were planning a future I didn't belong in, and filing paperwork to make sure I couldn't stop it. Sleep didn't come easily anymore, not because of pain, but because silence had started speaking louder than words ever had. I lay there 2 nights after that family dinner, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts moving like static electricity. Too much had gone unsaid, too many half-smiles, unfinished sentences, and deflections disguised as politeness. My mind kept circling back to one moment, A hazy, drugged day in the hospital, maybe the second or third after surgery. Someone had leaned over me with a clipboard. Imogen, I think, or maybe my brother. I remember them saying something about discharge papers. "It's just routine," they said. "Just scribble, it's fine." My hand barely worked. I couldn't even grip a spoon then. But I signed something. I remember the pen shaking in my fingers and the sound of someone chuckling gently. "That's good enough. We'll take care of the rest." That phrase, "we'll take care of the rest." That night, I pulled myself into my desk chair and opened the drawer I hadn't touched in months. Dust clung to the edges like a warning. My old laptop was still there, barely charged. I connected the cable and waited. It booted slower than my memory, but when the screen flickered to life, I opened the family portal. Passwords. I guessed 3 before remembering an old phrase my dad used. "Our truth is our will." That worked. Inside the portal, I found what I didn't even know I was searching for. There it was, a PDF labeled POA, Sigrid Fenna. Power of attorney. My name, Imogen's name, designated agent. The signature, mine. Date, 3 days post-surgery. I sat there, breath caught halfway between rage and disbelief. The ink on that digital file had more power over me than my own voice in this house. They hadn't waited for me to recover. They hadn't even waited for me to wake up. They waited for me to be unconscious. I called the hospital records line, requested a confirmation of my medication history. The nurse on the other end hesitated, then said, "You were still under monitored sedation on that date." I didn't respond, just hung up and stared at the screen. They didn't forge my name. They manipulated my body into authorizing their control. My body, my voice, was used against me. I pulled up my inbox. A new notification had come in. Subject line, disbursement confirmation. My injury compensation had been processed, but my bank account said otherwise. I traced the source, followed digital breadcrumbs through 2-step verifications and forgotten links until I landed on a joint account. My brother and Imogen. The deposit was there, clear as daylight, labeled house repairs, emergency. That was my money, blood money. Compensation for broken bones and severed nerves, and they had poured it into drywall and cabinet upgrades. They turned my pain into granite countertops, I whispered. Why, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I printed the email, the PDF, the transaction log. I started a new folder, physical, tangible, labeled it with a Sharpie. If I disappear. That night I wrote an email to my brother. It was short. "Did you know what day I signed that paperwork?" He never replied. Imogen sent a text. "Let's talk when emotions settle." I stared at it, then deleted it. I was done talking. Now, I was recording. I spent the next morning organizing everything, sorting by date, category, and impact. I wasn't just making a file, I was building a case. Screenshot after screenshot, highlighted statements, dates that aligned too perfectly. Every time I felt my hands tremble, I reminded myself, they were the ones who took what was mine. I was just taking it back. A quote from Maya Angelou echoed in my mind. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. They had shown me, and I was finally believing it. Near midday, I found a folder I hadn't opened in years. It was labeled Legal Old. Most of it was scanned copies of car insurance, old leases, boring adulthood flotsam. But then I saw it. An old will I'd drafted with my father's lawyer back when I opened the flower shop. It was outdated, unsigned, more symbolic than official. Tucked inside was a note in Dad's handwriting. "In case you ever need to reclaim your name." I stared at the words for a long time. I didn't understand why he wrote that. Until now. A week after discovering the signature that wasn't mine, I asked for a family check-in. That's the phrase they used back when I was still one of them. They liked that phrase. It sounded clinical, civilized, like we were a functioning household and not a crumbling empire in denial. The living room was arranged like a magazine spread. Throw pillows fluffed, lemon water on the coffee table, a tray of crackers no one would touch. It all screamed performance. Imogen sat on the edge of the couch like a talk show guest waiting for applause. My brother hovered by the fireplace, eyes darting everywhere but mine. My mother folded a napkin again and again, like she was working a spell. I wheeled myself in, holding a manila folder on my lap like a shield. "Let's talk," I said, my tone steady, "about who signed what and why." The silence was instant. Imogen didn't flinch. She looked mildly amused. "Sigrid, this doesn't have to be confrontational." "Then stop treating my body like a contract," I replied. "Let's start with the POA. Power of attorney, granted while I was sedated, and the rerouting of my injury compensation. Shall we go in order, or would you prefer I list everything alphabetically?" My brother shifted. "It wasn't meant to be like this." "No," I said. "It wasn't meant to be discovered." They tried to pivot, deflect. Imogen leaned forward with that PR-trained smile and said, "Actually, we wanted to talk to you too, about your space. We were thinking, maybe the garage unit might be more comfortable for you. Your own entrance, privacy. We could make it really cozy." I stared at her. "You mean the converted laundry room with no bathroom and mold on the ceiling?" "It's temporary," my mother offered, like she was apologizing for stale bread. "Until what?" I asked. "Until I forget what I'm owed?" Her smile faltered. Then Imogen, ever fearless in her own fiction, added, "Could you avoid being downstairs this weekend? We've got some people coming over. They don't know your situation, and it might just be easier." I took a long breath, let it fill every corner of the room. "So, now I'm the family's shame?" My brother opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother pressed her napkin flat against her knee. From the hallway, a small voice asked, "Is she leaving?" "Kaylee." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I reached into my folder and pulled out a document, bank transfers, highlighted lines showing withdrawals labeled emergency use. I read aloud, voice calm. "You labeled my money as an emergency, so tell me, was the emergency me?" No one responded. I returned the paper to the folder. "You can't bury someone who already climbed out of the fire." And then, as if summoned by the rising tension, Emran knocked at the open doorway. "Didn't mean to interrupt," he said, holding his tablet. "Got a question about that insurance file. The adjusters want to clarify the timeline from the day of the fire." Imogen's expression tightened like a rubber band pulled too far. "I thought you said you were at the grocery store when it started," he asked casually, tapping the screen. "Funny thing is, the oven was on when responders got there, gas still flowing, burners lit." Imogen smiled too widely. "I must have forgotten I preheated it. You know how hectic mornings can be." Emran didn't nod. He just said, "Sure," and looked at me for half a second longer than polite, then left. The room deflated like someone had opened a valve. Later that night, I sat alone in my room. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead, blades slicing the silence into quarters. I opened my phone and hit record. "My name is Sigrid Fenna. If anything happens to me, if I disappear, if I fall, if I'm found, know that the documents, the bank logs, the video, and the names are already with someone else." "I'm not paranoid. I'm prepared." I paused, staring at the red blinking light. They tried to turn me into a problem to be managed. I'm becoming a story they'll wish they hadn't written. Morning arrived with a strange stillness, the kind of silence that didn't soothe, it stared you down. I wheeled myself into the kitchen like I had every other day since the fire, but this time I wasn't just looking for coffee. I wanted confrontation, or maybe just confirmation that they were exactly who they kept proving themselves to be. Imogen and Aurel were already seated at the table, talking about almond milk and lawn maintenance like yesterday hadn't happened. My brother sat across from them, tapping away at his phone. He looked up when I entered, blinked once, and looked back down like I was a passing breeze. I rolled to the head of the table, pulled a folded printout from my lap, and laid it in the center. Their eyes flicked toward it, then away. No one reached for it. I spoke calmly. "You all said you wanted to breathe easier. Tell me, how light does betrayal feel?" Still nothing. Just the soft clink of spoon against ceramic as Imogen stirred her tea like we were at a country club brunch and not the scene of a slow-motion mutiny. I didn't eat. I didn't wait for answers. I left the paper there, a snapshot of stolen money, signed documents, and one woman's handwriting beside a date she was too drugged to remember. By midday, I needed air. I rolled out onto the porch, escaping their silence. That's when I heard it. Imogen's voice, faint but clear. She stood in the front yard, back turned to the house, phone pressed to her cheek. Just need the rest of the signatures. Timeline's tighter now. Won't be a problem much longer. She's practically ready to go. My spine stiffened. I reached into my pocket, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. Of course she doesn't know. She's still playing house in that chair like she's got options. I stopped recording. They weren't just excluding me. They were evicting me. From a life I built, from a house I paid for, from a family I bled for. I rolled back inside without a word. Once in my room, I booted up my laptop, opened tabs, one for legal aid, one for a former coworker now practicing law, one for a file folder I'd labeled years ago as a joke. Phoenix Protocol. I'd never imagined I'd actually need it. I began drafting an email. Subject: Family misuse of medical proxy. Request for consultation. I didn't send it yet. Just typing it out grounded me, made the anger useful. They wanted to act like I was fragile. But fragility is not the absence of strength. It's strength under pressure. And I was done being pressurized. Around 4 that afternoon, I made the mistake of checking social media. I hadn't logged in for weeks. I should have kept it that way. There she was. Imogen, of course. A filtered photo of her sitting beside a wheelchair, the blanket carefully draped, the lighting just right. My face wasn't visible, but the shape was unmistakable. Caption: Some burdens are blessings in disguise. We just breathe and carry on. I scrolled through the comments. She's a saint. Not everyone would take on something like that. She's an angel, honestly, a real caregiver. I closed the app, not in anger, but with surgical precision. They weren't just stealing money now. They were stealing narrative. My suffering had become her stage. That evening, she stopped me in the hallway. "We can't keep doing this," she said, arms crossed. "Let's not make it worse. You know how Mom gets when things feel tense." I tilted my head. "Then maybe don't confuse worry with manipulation." She tried to laugh it off. "You've always been dramatic. And you've always underestimated how dangerous silence can be." She didn't respond, just turned, like she had somewhere better to be. At 10 o'clock, a new email pinged on my phone. Withdrawal request approved, $42,800. I opened the banking app. The request had gone through hours ago, using the power of attorney I hadn't authorized. They weren't even subtle anymore. I looked at the screen, let the digits burn into my eyes, and whispered to myself, if they wanted war, they were about to learn who I was before the chair. The house was quieter than usual that morning. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind where everyone had already said what they needed to in their heads and were just waiting for someone else to flinch first. Aurel knocked gently at my door just after breakfast. She didn't wait for me to answer before pushing it open. "I wanted to show you something," she said with a practiced softness. "An idea we've been working on." I followed her through the hallway and out the side door. The garage had always been more storage space than structure. Boxes of Christmas lights, a retired treadmill, bags of mulch no one ever used. But now it had been half cleared. A twin mattress sat pushed against the far wall, a folding table, a single wooden chair, nothing else. No heater, no curtain, no sink. "We thought this might feel more independent for you," Aurel offered, stepping aside like she was proud of what they'd made. I rolled over the concrete threshold and let the silence grow before I answered. "No insulation, no locks, no bathroom." She opened her mouth, then closed it. "You're building a box," I said flatly, "not a home." She shifted, tried again. "It's just temporary, until we figure something better." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That evening, they held what passed for dinner. Imogen, my brother, Aurel, laughing about weekend guests, passing salad, sipping wine like nothing was coming apart. My place at the table was there this time, but only because I had already pushed my way into it. Somewhere between the garlic bread and the third mention of extra bedrooms for visitors, Imogen set down her fork and turned toward me. "We were wondering," she began with that tone that always made her sound like she was pitching a lifestyle brand. If you wouldn't mind staying in your room this weekend, some of the guests don't know your situation, and we want everyone to feel at ease. I stabbed my fork into a piece of chicken, then slowly set it down. Do you hear yourself? No one answered. Let them sit with their shame, I said, my voice cold. Not mine. My brother kept chewing, like nothing had been said. My mother glanced away. Back in my room, I opened the drawer where I kept the small voice recorder. It was discreet, fit into the palm of my hand. I activated the voice detection and placed it on the nightstand. Then I turned on my phone camera and started recording a voice memo. Each day now had its own log, notes, quotes, intentions. I emailed them to Briella nightly, under the subject line, for later, if needed. They wanted to delete me with paperwork and silence. I was going to outlive them in records. When they silence your voice, I whispered, leave behind your echoes. 2 days later, the doorbell rang while I was reading in the front room. I heard Imogen's voice rise in surprise. Some friends from her wellness group had dropped by unannounced. I could hear the panic in her pitch. We weren't expecting anyone, sorry. The house is a little... I rolled out into the hallway, past the entry table and toward the living room. Her eyes widened. Sigrid, she said quickly, stepping forward, arms out like a traffic officer. Maybe not now. But I was already in the room. Hi, I said to the 3 women standing just inside. I'm Sigrid. I paid for this roof, but not for the silence under it. There was a pause. One of them blinked. I thought you lived out of state? Imogen laughed, sharp and false. She's visiting. It's complicated. I smiled, rolled past them, and left the room. Let her explain that. That night, just before I turned off the lights, I reached for the door handle, and it didn't budge. It was locked, from the outside. I waited a full minute before banging once, then again. No one came. My phone buzzed. A calendar invite lit up the screen. Transfer discussion, Thursday. I stared at it, let the absurdity wash over me, then smiled for the first time in days, not out of humor, but because the mask had slipped completely. They weren't pretending anymore. I opened my laptop and started a new document. Title: Imogen Manipulation Timeline. DocX. First bullet point, March 12th. I saved her life. April 21st. She tried to delete mine. They forgot I don't need legs to walk into court. I hadn't expected to see myself on TikTok. And yet, there I was, cropped, blurred, bundled in a blanket like some elderly relative being cared for with dignity and grace. The video opened with Imogen's voice, quivering just enough to sound noble. Some burdens, she said, eyes misty, are blessings in disguise. I watched it in silence. The camera panned gently across the living room, catching glimpses of neatly arranged meals, folded laundry, soft lighting, and finally, me, or rather the back of my wheelchair. I recognized the floral shawl draped over my shoulders, the one my mother used to wear when she still had warmth in her. The comments came in fast and syrupy. She's a saint. I don't know how she does it. Not everyone would take in family like that. I stared at the screen, unmoving. I wasn't the blessing. I was the brand. By lunchtime, it got worse. I overheard my brother talking on the phone in the driveway, voice casual, like he was updating someone on sports scores. Yeah, he said. Sigrid had that old heater in her room. We told her to toss it, but, well, you know how she is. She never listens. I sat just inside the front window, behind the curtain, close enough to hear, too far for him to see. Later, during dinner, Aurel told a neighbor visiting from out of town. It was tragic. She didn't mean for it to happen. But accidents are what they are. They were rewriting history with polite phrases. They weren't saying I started the fire, but they weren't saying I didn't. That night, Briella sent me a screenshot. A comment thread beneath Imogen's video. Someone had asked, "Didn't the fire start in her room?" Imogen's reply. A single teardrop emoji. I called Briella. My voice didn't shake. It's time. Contact Celeste. I opened the email draft I had written days ago. No edits, no second guessing. I clicked send. Celeste replied within the hour. Her message was clear and surgical. Let's schedule a call. I'll need the POA paperwork, financial docs, and any evidence of misrepresentation. I opened a new folder on my desktop, titled it Reconstruction of Truth. I dragged in files one by one. Bank transfers, screenshots of Imogen's posts, the PDF of the power of attorney. Every click was another brick in the wall between who they thought I was and what I was becoming. At the top of a blank document, I typed, "If they can write lies, I can write my legacy." Celeste sent the first cease and desist the next day, calm but direct. All media featuring my likeness was to be removed, the video, the captions, the comments. It also suggested that continued defamation could result in legal escalation. I watched from behind the blinds as Imogen opened the envelope on the front porch. Her usual smile faded, not all at once, but like a candle slowly starving for oxygen. She looked around, then back at the page. She didn't come inside for a while. When she finally did, she caught me in the hallway. "I was just trying to help," she said, voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "No," I said. "You were trying to profit." The next morning, something strange happened. I woke up to a ping on my phone, a notification from the family group chat, the one I'd been removed from months ago. I was back in, no greeting, no explanation, just one message at the top. Family meeting tonight, non-negotiable. I read it twice, and for once, I was looking forward to it. The living room looked like it had been dressed for a baby shower. Doilies, lemonade in a pitcher, and a platter of cucumber sandwiches that no one touched. Imogen sat like a host waiting for applause, her smile frozen just enough to show how forced it was. Aurel hovered by the mantel with a wine glass, her eyes flicking toward me, then away. My brother stood near the window, arms crossed, posture rigid. "Glad you could join us," Imogen chirped. "We just want to clear the air." I looked around at the perfectly arranged seating, the matching napkins, and thought, this isn't a meeting. It's a stage. I took my place, parked my chair near the coffee table, folder in my lap, jaw tight. Aurel touched my shoulder lightly on her way past. Her hand was cold, not the temperature kind, just absent of warmth, like someone doing what's expected in a room full of people watching. Imogen began. "There's been a lot of tension lately, misunderstandings. And I think we can all agree that communication is key." She paused, looked around like she was expecting a nod from the jury. No one spoke. I didn't move. "Before we spiral further," she continued, "maybe we can all take a moment to own our parts in what's happened." I opened the folder and pulled out the tablet. "Let's do that." I tapped the screen. A video played, silent footage of Imogen in the kitchen, preheating the oven, leaving the burner on, walking out the door. Time-stamped, clear. Aurel gasped. My brother exhaled through his nose like someone slapped him with paperwork. "That's out of context," he said quickly. "So is rewriting history," I replied, my voice calm and cutting. Imogen's expression cracked for the first time. She blinked too many times, reached for her glass, and sipped without swallowing. I placed another file on the table. "Redirected funds," I said. "Power of attorney obtained during sedation, and documentation revoking it. As of yesterday, I've filed formal charges, embezzlement, medical fraud, abuse of guardianship, and that's just the start." There was a beat of silence, not the kind that asks for grace, the kind that says something permanent just shifted. Aurel's mouth parted. "You're suing your family?" "They stopped being family," I said, the moment they started filing papers behind my back. My brother stood suddenly. "We were trying to help. You're ungrateful." Imogen wiped under her eye. No tears, just maintenance. No one reached for her. Aurel sat straighter, as if the room suddenly became too heavy for her spine. "We thought you couldn't manage all this on your own." "Then you should have asked," I said. "Not taken." Voices overlapped. Phrases like overreacting, doing our best, and no one's perfect floated around like smoke from a fire no one wanted to claim. I sat still, watching them twist in their own discomfort. A courtroom without a gavel, a trial without a judge, except I wasn't the one on the stand anymore. When the noise settled, I cleared my throat. I crawled into that fire because I believed family protects each other. You've proven that belief wrong. So now I'll protect myself. I backed my chair up slowly. No one followed. No one stopped me. Outside, Briella waited in the driveway. Her window was rolled down, music low, hands resting on the steering wheel like she'd been parked for years. I opened the door and slid the folder onto my lap. "You good?" she asked, voice quiet. "Not yet," I answered. "But tomorrow, they'll learn what losing me really means." She didn't speak. She didn't need to. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time at the house, its lights on, curtains pulled tight, and when the foreclosure notice hits their door, I hope the silence finally speaks. 2 weeks passed. The storm they tried to weather with silence had done its damage, and I was still standing, or rather sitting, but stronger than ever. I was staying at Briella's now. Her small guest room had peeling wallpaper and a creaky ceiling fan that rattled at night, but at least the walls didn't whisper betrayal. The house I'd once held together from the inside was finally caving in on itself. The envelope came mid-morning. Briella was the one who found it in the mailbox, her fingers brushing over the red, urgent stamp. She didn't open it, just handed it to me with that steady look she always had when things were about to get worse before they got better. I didn't flinch. Inside, a foreclosure notice. Final warning. Property auction scheduled. No extensions granted. My name wasn't on the mortgage anymore, not after the paperwork shuffle they'd orchestrated behind my back, but I remembered the payment cycle. I remembered what I used to cover when their wallets conveniently dried up. "The city's flagged the yard too," Briella added, gently. "Code violations, overgrown grass, junk at the side gate. You want me to read it?" I nodded. She read the citations aloud while I stared out the window. The words barely registered. Not because I didn't care, but because I had already known this was coming. The house was finally reflecting its occupants, unkempt, hollow, pretending to still be alive. Later that afternoon, Diane from next door showed up. She stood on Briella's porch, holding a small container of banana bread like it was a passport back into morality. "I wasn't sure I should come," she began. "But, I've been hearing things about what happened, about what they did to you." I didn't say anything. I just watched her face fold in on itself as the guilt set in. "Did they really try to move you out without a lawyer? Without consent?" "They tried to erase the fire they couldn't put out," I answered. "That's all you really need to know." She took a breath. "If you need someone to say what they saw, how things changed, I will. I saw it, all of it. I just didn't know what to do at the time." "I'm not asking for loyalty," I told her. "Just honesty." Diane nodded, tears threatening to fall, and left the banana bread behind like an offering. That evening, I got the call from Celeste. "The assisted care agency you mentioned. They submitted a report. Apparently, the power of attorney filings raised red flags." My stomach knotted. Not from fear, but from something colder. Validation. "It's escalated now," she continued. "The investigation's formal." An hour later, a text lit up my phone. From my brother. "You've gone too far." I didn't hesitate. "No," I wrote back. "I've gone far enough. You just thought I wouldn't move." The next day, Aurel showed up unannounced. She didn't knock. Just stood there on Briella's porch, holding a small cardboard box like she was delivering memories. She didn't speak. I didn't invite her in. Inside the box, old Polaroids, a crayon drawing from 3rd grade with Sigrid the Smartest scrawled across the top, my hospital birth bracelet, faded but intact. She looked down, eyes glassy. "Your father always knew you'd be stronger than the rest of us." I nodded. She turned to go. I didn't stop her. That kind of grief, what she carried, wasn't something I could fix. Not anymore. 2 days later, I drove by the house. Not to return, just to see it as it crumbled. A for sale sign hung crooked in the front yard. Weeds choked the walkway. A soda can rolled across the porch like a wind-blown memory. A realtor paced inside, making notes on a clipboard. No one else was there. And suddenly, I remembered the hospital curb. They'd dropped me there months ago, told me they were stuck in traffic when I called to ask where they were. I had waited under the rain for over an hour, wheelchair soaked, gown clinging to my skin. Now I understood. They had been moving on without me long before the fire ever touched our lives. Sometimes we don't lose people, I whispered to myself. They lose us, and call it your fault. That evening, as Briella reheated soup in the kitchen, my phone rang. Celeste again. They want to settle, she said. Quietly, no press, no courtroom. I leaned back in the chair, exhaled through my teeth. Tell them they had their chance to be quiet, I replied. She paused. So, trial? Next week, I said. And I'm not the one on trial. Charleston County Courthouse didn't look like the place where reckoning would arrive. Its white columns and brick facade gave off the air of civility, tradition, and other polished illusions. But I'd come here for something uglier than tradition. I'd come for truth. Celeste met me outside, sharp in navy and heels that clicked like punctuation. I wore black slacks and a white blouse with sleeves I could roll down to cover the tremble in my arms. We didn't speak as we rolled in through security. Our words were already prepared. There was nothing left to rehearse. My brother was already inside, pacing. Imogen sat beside him, posture ramrod straight, lips tight and colorless under heavy foundation. Her expression was blank until she saw me. Then she smiled like we were old college roommates bumping into each other at a grocery store. I didn't return it. It's not courage if you're not scared, I whispered to myself as we entered the courtroom. It's clarity. Celeste started strong. Her voice was steady, deliberate, each sentence a scalpel. She laid out the abuse of power of attorney, the financial diversion, the coercion masked as care. My family didn't interrupt. They didn't even shift in their seats, but I watched them closely. The subtle twitch in my brother's jaw, the tight grip Imogen had on her pen, the way Aurel clutched her handbag like it held an exit. The judge nodded, unimpressed but alert, and allowed Celeste to present the supporting documents. What came next wasn't theatrical, no grand gasps or pounding fists, just paper. Exhibit C, Celeste said. Bank records, utility transfers, insurance payments, every monthly deposit under Sigrid Fenna's name. Imogen's lawyer objected, called it voluntary support. Celeste didn't even blink. Voluntary doesn't mean invisible. That shut him down. I didn't flinch through any of it. My pulse was high but steady. I'd spent months waiting to be seen. Now, I was undeniable. Then came the clip. Celeste opened the file on her tablet, turned it toward the courtroom screen. It played without sound. The kitchen. Imogen walking in, setting the oven, leaving it on, walking out. That was it. Simple. Devastating. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly. A woman on the jury gasped. The prosecutor leaned forward just enough to signal interest. I said nothing, but inside my chest, something exhaled. They'd called me careless, said I'd endangered the house, questioned my stability. And all this time, their silence had been the real threat. Imogen broke first. I was stressed, she said through tears, voice trembling just the right amount to make you wonder if it was real. It was a hard time. I was doing the best I could, Aurel chimed in, voice thin. We were scared. We didn't know how to help her. I turned to the judge, voice measured. Help isn't silent when harm is loud, I said. They didn't fail me. They tried to erase me. The judge called for recess, promised to review the materials and reconvene next week. Outside, the sun was already low. Reporters waited on the courthouse steps, notebooks ready. I ignored them. Celeste leaned toward me. We made our point. Yeah, I said. And we didn't have to shout to be heard. That evening, back at Briella's, the quiet was deeper than usual. Not heavy, just wide. Like there was more space around me now. Room I'd finally earned. I was halfway through filing away the last batch of evidence when a knock came at the door. Briella opened it. It was my brother. He held an envelope that looked older than the rest of him, worn at the corners like it had passed through too many hands. I didn't come to apologize, he said, voice low. I came to ask if you meant everything you said in there. I looked at him for a long moment, and then I opened the door wider, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I was ready to decide. It was a Wednesday morning when my brother came back. The air outside was thick with that late spring Carolina damp, the kind that clings to your skin like regret. I was on Briella's porch, drinking black coffee that had gone lukewarm, when I saw him walking up the driveway with slow, heavy steps. He wasn't carrying a suitcase or anything that would signal permanence, just an old manila envelope in both hands, like it might explode if he gripped it wrong. "I'm not here to apologize," he said. "I didn't expect one," I replied. He handed me the envelope. Inside were photos from our childhood. Christmases, beach trips, a shot of me on my 8th birthday with chocolate cake on my nose. Tucked behind them was a letter in our father's handwriting, dated 6 years before he passed. "You don't have to forgive us," my brother added, "but I needed you to know. I remember who paid the bills when nobody else could." I didn't say thank you. I didn't invite him inside. "You don't need to say sorry," I said. "You need to be different." He nodded. That was it. No speeches, no tears, just the smallest crack in a wall we'd both helped build. 2 days later, I returned to the house. It wasn't mine anymore, not on paper, not in spirit, but there were still a few boxes left, old books, a ceramic dish from my grandmother's china set, a pair of gloves I hadn't worn since before the fire. The house was silent, stripped of energy. Even the light through the windows seemed muted, like it didn't know where to land. I wheeled through the halls, every creak of the floorboards echoing louder than voices ever had in that space. I passed through the living room, the kitchen, paused briefly in the hallway where the flames had once licked at the drywall and turned everything sideways. Upstairs, I found a drawer I hadn't touched in years, letters, dozens of them, cards, little packages, bracelets, books, even a scarf. All from friends, former coworkers. Even a neighbor who'd moved to Florida. All lost in the mail, Imogen had said. All untouched. I placed the bundle in my lap. Everything else I left behind. As I reached the threshold of the front door, I looked back once. I didn't feel the need to slam it shut. Closure, I'd realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to step back inside. That evening, my mother appeared on Briella's porch. No warning, no bags. She sat on the far end of the bench, leaving a polite stretch of wood between us. "You always made us uncomfortable," she said, after a long silence. "Not because you were difficult, but because you saw too clearly." I didn't reply. I just watched the sky bleed pink into dusk. Sometimes silence is mercy, sometimes it's truth. That night, alone in my room, I opened the voice memo I'd recorded weeks ago, the one that started with, "If anything happens to me." I listened to it all the way through. Then I deleted it. Nothing had happened to me. I had happened to them. The next day, a letter came in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, feminine but strong. Inside was a short note from Aviana, the woman who had once sent me legal resources when I thought I had no allies, a stranger who'd seen herself in my unraveling. "I watched your hearing," she wrote. "Thank you for not being quiet. You gave women like me a voice." I smiled, folded the letter, and slid it beside my hospital bracelet in the drawer next to my bed. That night, while Briella stirred pasta and hummed off key to the radio, I rolled into the living room, opened my laptop, and pulled up the folder labeled Phoenix Fund, Business Plan. Briella walked in, wiping her hands with a dish towel. "Got your message? What's next?" I didn't look up, just opened a blank document. "We're going to make sure no one who gets silenced stays that way." It was time to build something louder than their lies. The certified envelope arrived on a Monday morning, slipped under my office door by a courier too polite to knock. The logo at the top was familiar now, Charleston County Court. The paper inside was thicker than it needed to be, the kind reserved for statements meant to last. Judgment in my favor, restitution of funds, nullification of the power of attorney. All misrepresentations publicly recorded in court documents, no sealing allowed. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I read every line slowly, deliberately. Then I stood, on my own, with the support brace, and fed the backup files into the shredder. There was no need to keep copies anymore. The truth was now documented where it mattered. I opened the window, let the spring air in, and for the first time in months, I exhaled. 2 days later, the house was sold. The place I had fought to protect, then fought to survive in, no longer belonged to them, to anyone. Imogen moved to another town, far enough away to pretend she was never part of the mess. My brother crashed with an old college friend who owed him one. Aurel went to stay with her sister in North Carolina, a woman she hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The neighbors whispered, of course. They always do when polished facades crumble. That family used to be so close. Didn't she have a niece in a wheelchair or something? I heard it was all about money. The house stood, but no one claimed it anymore, and I didn't feel like reclaiming it either. Instead, I turned towards something new. The Phoenix office opened quietly. No ribbon cutting, no media coverage, just a modest sign above a second-story window above a bookstore downtown. A place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. That was the point. Inside, a desk, a wall of resources, and 2 chairs. One for me, one for the woman walking in next. Briella handled intake forms with her usual calm. Celeste sat on the board, providing legal oversight. We started with survivors of familial exploitation, women with disabilities who were told to be grateful for the bare minimum while being erased in silence. A plaque by the door read, "The louder they silenced you, the stronger your story became." One day, a podcast invitation came. I didn't want to do it at first, but something inside nudged me. This wasn't about me anymore, so I showed up, sat across from the host, and told the story from start to finish. No dramatics, no pity, just the facts, the pain, and the choices in between. When the episode aired, the clip went viral. "You gave me courage. I'm crying, but I'm not broken. You're the voice I needed when I was too tired to scream." The comments poured in like rain after drought. They called me strong, brave, fierce, but I was none of those things when I was being dragged across the coals. I became them because I had no choice. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting gave it away. Aviana. The same woman who had once mailed me a list of lawyers, unprompted, during my darkest stretch. Her note was simple. "I watched your hearing. Thank you for not being quiet. You gave women like me a voice." I smiled, folded the letter carefully, tucked it beside my birth bracelet in the drawer next to my desk. Then I wrote her back. "You saved me before I ever met you. Now it's my turn to light the way." I sealed the envelope, and instead of asking Briella to drop it off like I used to, I walked, down the street to the mailbox. I leaned on my cane, held the railing, and took every step with intention. Because movement wasn't just physical anymore, it was proof. That evening, I wheeled onto the small balcony outside my office. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across Charleston's historic streets. I held a small flame pendant in my hand, one I'd bought with my first paycheck post-trial. "They thought the fire ended me," I said aloud to no one. "But I learned this. Ashes don't mean it's over. They mean something new can begin." I closed my hand around the pendant. "This time, the fire is mine."